8% was all she said before laughing, Nicole Walsh's voice echoing off the glass walls of her corner office as she mocked my age and said they wanted hungry young talent, not costly veterans stuck in old ways, her Harvard MBA shining behind her like a badge of superiority. I stood there stunned, gripping a folder that held 16 years of my work, watching a 37-year-old CEO with flawless confidence brush aside everything I'd built while she earned bonuses big enough for luxury homes. That folder contained proof of every major system I designed, every project I carried, every late night I gave while believing loyalty still mattered. I'm Ryan Matthews, 48 years old, Director of Cloud Engineering at TechVault Solutions, and until that moment I truly believed effort and dedication would be rewarded. Instead, I watched younger engineers with fewer skills but louder buzzwords rise past me, simply because they fit a trend better than the experience that kept the company running. My wife Sarah jokes that I'm stubborn, and my kids think I'm ancient because I still prefer email over Slack, but what Nicole never understood was that my so-called outdated methods were the reason their cloud systems had run without failure for more than 10 years. While she was earning her MBA and studying disruption, I was in server rooms at 3 a.m. making sure the company didn't collapse, and I reminded her that the cloud migration I designed saved $2.3 million every year, that my security framework stopped 3 major breach attempts, including a ransomware attack that could have destroyed us. My voice came out quieter than I wanted as I listed the work, but she barely listened, waving me off while laughing from a chair that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, surrounded by glass walls, chrome, and expensive art meant to intimidate and reinforce power. She told me calmly that everyone was replaceable, even senior engineers with decades of experience, and if I thought I was worth more, I should try my luck somewhere else, delivering the same hollow smile she used in company meetings when she called us a family, before suggesting I think about early retirement and enjoy a nice golf course instead. Something inside me broke in that moment, not my heart but the belief I'd carried for 16 years that experience would eventually matter, that loyalty would be rewarded, and that the company I helped grow from a small startup into a major corporation would remember who built it. I quietly said I understood as I gathered my portfolio, my hands shaking while I tried to keep my dignity, aware through the glass walls that my co-workers were pretending not to listen while hearing every word. Nicole shifted into a rehearsed tone of concern, telling me I was good at my job but too expensive, explaining that the board preferred paying 2 new graduates the same salary because they were cheaper, energetic, and easier to manage, calling it business and nothing personal. That phrase hit hardest, because 16 years of late nights, missed family moments, and sacrifices weren't just transactions, and in that moment, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. The realization hit me like cold water, stripping away 16 years of conditioning that taught me to be loyal, agreeable, and grateful for whatever I was given, and if I was truly just a replaceable part in her machine, then it was time to see how that machine worked without me. I walked back through the open office to my so-called workspace, not even a real office after 16 years and a director title, just a dressed-up cubicle justified by talk of collaboration. My desk sat between 2 recent graduates who called me sir and asked why we couldn't rewrite massive legacy systems in a weekend, while morning light spilled across rows of hoodie-wearing 20-somethings typing furiously on laptops, building the future on systems I had designed before they learned to drive. My screen filled with the usual flood of Slack messages, emails, and meeting reminders where I was expected to explain, again, why shortcuts don't scale, and beside my keyboard sat a family photo from last Christmas, Sarah smiling through exhaustion after chemotherapy and Emma home from college with tuition rising again, making the cost of all this impossible to ignore. My 18-year-old son Jake was already overwhelmed by college applications and the debt waiting for him, while healthcare premiums swallowed nearly a third of my income and Sarah's cancer treatments had cost us $4,000 to $7,000 out of pocket last year, forcing us to borrow against our home. Emma's tuition was draining our savings faster than I could rebuild them, and Jake was looking at engineering schools charging $65,000 a year, all while I was being laughed at for asking for an 8% raise after 16 years of service. At the same time, the company newsletter announced Nicole's third vacation home, a ski chalet added to her Malibu beach house and her main home in Pacific Heights, and featured a photo of her accepting an innovation award for a security framework I had designed. I opened my desk drawer and took out the worn leather notebook I'd kept for years, filled with ideas scribbled during breaks and commutes, carefully documented personal projects, algorithms, security systems, and models I'd built at home on my own time and equipment, code the company used without formal ownership because I'd been too trusting, too loyal, and too slow to realize that loyalty in corporate life only flows one way. I flipped through the notebook, each page bringing back memories of late nights and weekends spent building systems while my family slept, and it was hard not to feel the irony as I realized the very innovations Nicole called outdated were the backbone of TechVault's success. I stopped at my notes from April 2021, where I'd outlined machine learning algorithms for advanced threat detection developed during lockdown, clearly labeled as a personal project created on my own system, complete with detailed commit logs from my personal GitHub account. What Nicole never knew, and what the company never bothered to check, was that I had never signed away the rights to these ideas, since my original contract only covered work done on company time with company resources. My most valuable work lived in a gray area, built on my own equipment during my own hours, and as I scrolled through my GitHub repositories on my phone, seeing years of timestamps and thousands of lines of code, I understood just how much leverage I actually had. The system that saved TechVault millions had started as a weekend project to protect my home network, and the cloud optimization tools that earned Nicole her award came from experiments I ran to cut my own server costs. Every breakthrough the company claimed as its own grew out of my personal curiosity and unpaid effort, ideas I shared out of loyalty without ever thinking to protect myself or imagining the company I helped build would laugh at my request for fair pay. When another HR email popped up promoting a newsletter headline about TechVault's revolutionary security platform, my stomach tightened as I saw Nicole's photo again, praising innovation without naming a single engineer. In that moment, I thought of my father, who spent 35 years at one factory before his job was shipped overseas, always telling me that loyalty mattered and that if you took care of the company, it would take care of you. He believed that right up to the day he was handed a pink slip and a pension that vanished when the company went bankrupt, and my mother learned the same lesson after 40 years at a law firm that replaced her with software the moment she turned 60, sending her off with a cake and a watch. They both warned me that companies no longer reward loyalty, only quarterly profits, but I didn't listen and spent 16 years building someone else's empire, trusting that effort would be repaid until Nicole's laughter shattered that belief. I opened my phone and stopped on a contact I'd never used, Scott Rodriguez, VP of Engineering at TechFlow Solutions and TechVault's biggest competitor, who had reached out after a conference where I spoke on cloud security and had quietly stayed in touch. His last message, sent 4 months earlier, still waited unread, offering a real conversation and a company that valued experience, not just youthful energy, and once I would have brushed it off out of loyalty. Now, as my finger hovered over the call button and years of conditioning urged me to hesitate, her words echoed in my head about early retirement, and I knew exactly how wrong I'd been. I couldn't stop replaying her dismissive gesture and the way she spoke about me like outdated equipment ready to be replaced, with no respect for what I'd built, and my thoughts went to Sarah battling cancer while stressing over medical bills, to Emma working long hours at a coffee shop to afford textbooks, and to Jake talking about settling for community college because he didn't want to add to our debt. My family deserved better than a father who accepted being undervalued after 16 years of loyalty. They deserved someone who stood up for his worth instead of being tossed aside. Nicole had made it clear that loyalty meant nothing to her, so I pressed call. Scott Rodriguez answered with a calm, genuine confidence I hadn't heard in years, and when I told him who I was and said it was time for that conversation, his excitement was real as he said he'd been following my work and asked if I was ready to explore a place where experience mattered. As he spoke, I looked around the open office at young faces glued to screens and glass offices filled with managers making decisions about systems they barely understood. At the corner office, Nicole was probably already plotting how to replace her expensive legacy employee with some eager young talent, but I was ready. I told Scott Rodriguez I was available, and he suggested dinner at a quiet Palo Alto spot at 7 p.m. The timing was perfect. Sarah had her support group, the kids were at activities, and for the first time in years, I felt not just relief but purpose, finally taking control of my own future. 4 hours later, I sat across from Scott at Alexander's Steakhouse, a place that required weeks of reservations, yet he'd secured a private corner table with a single call, showing the reach TechFlow had in Silicon Valley. Scott was in his early 50s, gray at the temples, sharp-eyed, casually dressed in jeans and a blazer, the kind of presence that spoke of hands-on experience rather than corporate posturing. His handshake was firm, confident without being aggressive, and as he studied me over his whiskey, he said he'd been following my work for years, or more precisely, the sudden leaps in TechVault security that matched my project timelines, and mentioned the Meridian Bank threat detection system, which his team had spent 6 months trying to reverse engineer without success. Pride and a knot of tension twisted in my stomach. Someone had actually noticed, someone who understood the complexity of what I'd built. "How did you know that was mine?" I asked. Scott smiled and sipped his drink. "Because Nicole Walsh doesn't have the technical background to grasp even basic machine learning, let alone design these systems. Innovation doesn't happen by accident, someone with deep expertise built those systems. And I have contacts across the industry, your reputation among engineers is gold, even if management doesn't see it. Half the security pros in Silicon Valley know your work." I sipped my beer, listening to the hum of IPO chatter and venture capital talk, feeling like a 48-year-old engineer in a world that thought innovation peaked at 35. "What exactly are you offering?" I asked. Scott laid it out. Senior Engineering Director, leading the entire Cloud Security Division, $350,000 base salary, full equity vesting over 4 years, and a team of 8 senior engineers, average age 45. Because experience produces better code than enthusiasm. My breath caught. $350,000 was 2.5 times my current pay, enough to cover Sarah's treatments, fund both kids' engineering education without debt, and finally balance financial security with family. But even more than the money, Scott emphasized recognition.
Your name on patents. Your photo in trade publications. Credit for the innovations you create. "We don't let managers take credit for engineers' work," Scott said, pausing to read my reaction. "And if you bring personal innovations, systems developed on your own time with your own resources, we have a proper IP acquisition process. Fair market compensation for proven technology." Something in his eyes showed understanding. He knew about the legal grey areas big companies often ignore. TechFlow wasn't just offering a job, they were offering proper recognition for work TechVault had taken for granted. I placed my worn leather notebook on the table, filled with GIT commits and detailed development logs proving these systems were personal projects, implemented by TechVault without formal rights acquisition. Scott's eyes widened as he flipped through dated algorithms, seeing years of weekend work turned into the backbone of TechVault security. "This is comprehensive. How much of their infrastructure is yours?" he asked. "About 60%, I said quietly. Core threat detection, cloud optimization, automated response systems, all developed in my home lab." Scott closed the notebook and looked at me. Quite an oversight on their legal team's part. I smirked. Nicole doesn't value senior work. Including legal, apparently. She was too focused on hiring young talent to care about protecting the company's existing assets. Over the next 2 hours, Scott and I dove into technical details, team structures, and project timelines. He understood enterprise-scale systems in a way Nicole never had, asking smart questions about scalability, security trade-offs, and implementation challenges. For the first time in years, I was talking to someone who truly respected my experience and potential. By dessert, we had a complete transition plan to bring my personal innovations to TechFlow legally and transparently. Everything Nicole should have done years ago if she valued long-term relationships over short-term savings. 2 weeks later, I placed my resignation on Nicole's desk, printed on company letterhead and submitted through official channels, professional even as I prepared to take what she'd dismissed. She barely looked up from her laptop, multitasking like always. Scanning the letter, she asked, "Where are you going?" I told her, "TechFlow Solutions." Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing, "Our biggest competitor." "That's unfortunate timing. We're in final negotiations with Meridian Bank to expand our security contract." "I know," I said calmly. "I built the threat detection model that won us that contract." For the first time since that morning, I saw real concern, and maybe even fear, as she calculated what my departure could cost the company. She immediately tried to negotiate, offering a 15% raise and a VP promotion. Everything I had wanted that morning, more than I'd dared ask for. If she'd shown that flexibility earlier, none of this would have happened. But some doors, once closed, don't reopen with money alone. The offer from TechFlow is $350,000 plus equity, I said, and more importantly, they value experience over age bias. She laughed hollowly, warning I'd struggle to keep up at 48. I smiled, a new confidence settling in. My final 2 weeks at TechVault were surreal. Colleagues who had ignored me for years now sought my advice, middle management scrambled to document processes they'd never learned, and I meticulously completed transition documents, trained my eager but nervous 26-year-old replacement Josh, and backed up all my personal project records, including every email proving TechVault had used my work without proper acquisition. I left the Glass headquarters at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday, and by Monday I was in my new corner office at TechFlow, leading 8 senior engineers, ages 38 to 52, ready to revolutionize cloud security with a team that understood wisdom and energy could coexist. 6 weeks later, the first implementation of my security framework went live at TechFlow. The same algorithms Nicole had dismissed as outdated legacy thinking were now detecting threats 72 hours before they materialized. Processing speeds increased 35%. False positives dropped by 60%. Our sales team had data proving we could outperform TechVault's best metrics by significant margins. The machine learning models I'd trained in my garage were predicting attack patterns with 94% accuracy. The threat detection system that had saved TechVault millions was now saving TechFlow's clients even more, with my name properly credited on every patent filing. For the first time in 16 years, my innovations belonged to me legally and professionally. The morning Meridian Bank announced they were terminating their contract with TechVault and switching to TechFlow. My phone started ringing. First call was from a trade publication wanting to interview the architect behind TechFlow's security breakthrough. Second call was from a venture capital firm interested in licensing our threat detection technology. Third call was from Nicole. I let it go to voicemail. She called 6 more times over 2 days before, leaving a message that I saved for posterity. Ryan, this is Nicole. We need to discuss consulting opportunities immediately. TechVault is prepared to offer a substantial compensation package for your expertise. Please call me back as soon as possible. We made a mistake. The admission felt hollow. Too little, too late, motivated by panic rather than recognition. I didn't return the call. 4 days later, Nicole was waiting beside my car in the TechFlow parking garage. She looked different, tired, stressed, none of the polished confidence from that morning when she'd laughed at my raise request. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and we both knew it.
This is inappropriate, I said, maintaining distance while fishing for my car keys. You've put 180 jobs at risk, she said, her voice urgent and desperate. TechVault is facing an existential crisis. Because of the intellectual property you took. I didn't take anything that belonged to TechVault, I replied calmly. I took my personal intellectual property that TechVault used without proper acquisition. Your legal team never did their due diligence, and you never valued experienced personnel enough to care about the details. Nicole stepped closer, desperation evident in her bloodshot eyes. She'd probably been working 18-hour days trying to contain the damage. Name your price. Whatever TechFlow is paying, we'll double it, triple it. We'll make you CTO, give you equity, whatever you want. I thought about those 16 years, sitting in that cubicle while she collected bonuses for my work. About the morning she dismissed me like obsolete hardware. About my family's medical bills. And my children's educational dreams that her 8% refusal had jeopardized. You once told me everyone's replaceable, I said quietly. Even senior engineers. I'm just following your business philosophy. The following quarter, TechVault stock fell 47%. They laid off 180 employees in 2 waves, targeting senior staff with the Highest salaries first. The tech media described it as a catastrophic loss of institutional knowledge and mysterious deterioration of their award-winning security systems. Industry analysts wrote case studies about the dangers of undervaluing experienced talent in competitive markets. Nicole resigned under pressure from the board after their stock hit a 3-year low. Her replacement was a 55-year-old former IBM executive who immediately began trying to poach senior engineers from competitors. Too late, the damage to TechVault's reputation in the engineering community was irreversible. Then came the inevitable lawsuit. TechVault sued me for theft of intellectual property, corporate espionage, and breach of fiduciary duty. Their case collapsed spectacularly when my documentation proved conclusively that I had developed the core algorithms as personal projects. The judge not only dismissed their claims but awarded me legal fees, noting that TechVault had failed to secure proper ownership of innovations they'd implemented. But victory felt more complex than I'd expected. 3 months after the lawsuit ended, Amanda Wilson, TechVault's former head of customer service, visited my office. She'd been with the company for 12 years before the layoffs, someone I'd shared coffee with and complained about management decisions alongside. 180 people lost their jobs, Ryan, she said, sitting across from my desk. People with families, mortgages, kids in college. Was your revenge worth destroying their livelihoods? The question hit harder than any lawsuit. I'd focused so intently on Nicole's arrogance that I'd underestimated the collateral damage. You're right to be angry, I said. That's why TechFlow has hired 73 former TechVault employees in the last 4 months, including everyone from your customer service team who wanted to join us. Amanda's expression softened slightly. And the others? The ones who can't relocate, who are too specialized, who are close to retirement. That conversation led to the creation of Experience Matters, TechFlow's formal initiative, targeting displaced senior professionals industry-wide. We partnered with 3 retraining organizations to offer skills updates for engineers over 45. We created consulting opportunities for near-retirement professionals who wanted flexible arrangements. We became the first major tech company to explicitly reject age bias in hiring. The program became a model for Silicon Valley. Other companies began questioning their own youth-obsessed hiring practices. Within a year, applications to our open positions increased 400%, with experienced professionals specifically seeking out companies that valued their expertise over their energy levels. 8 months after leaving TechVault, I received the IEEE Lifetime Achievement Award for contributions to cloud security architecture. Standing at that podium, looking out at an audience full of gray-haired engineers and young developers working together, I thought about Nicole's comment regarding early retirement. She'd been wrong about everything. We weren't expensive legacy employees clinging to outdated approaches. We were battle-tested professionals who understood the difference between moving fast and building systems that actually work long-term. When you combine decades of hard-won experience with the motivation to prove doubters wrong, you create something pretty unstoppable. A year later, I still think about that morning in Nicole's office. Not with anger anymore, but with something approaching gratitude. Her laughter taught me the most valuable lesson of my career: your loyalty means nothing if you don't value yourself first. The gray hair she saw as a liability turned out to be my competitive advantage. Last month, TechVault made headlines again, declaring bankruptcy and selling their assets to a private equity firm. The company I'd helped build from 50 employees to 2,000 was gone, dismantled by leadership that confused energy with competence, disruption with innovation. If you're reading this and you're over 45, dealing with managers who think your experience is expensive rather than valuable, remember something: your knowledge isn't just worth defending, it's worth fighting for. Document your work, understand your legal rights, And never let anyone convince you that your best years are behind you. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to become invisible. Age isn't a weakness in tech, it's wisdom waiting to be unleashed. And when experience finally gets angry enough to demand respect, industries change. The algorithms are still running. My name is on the patents. And somewhere in Silicon Valley, a CEO is learning not to laugh at senior engineers asking for their worth.